My name is Hannah Parker, and what should have been a simple Sunday lunch with my in-laws turned into the most humiliating ambush of my life. Before I tell you how everything flipped, and how I walked away with my dignity, hit that like button and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It started with an invitation that felt more like a summons. A linen-textured card arrived in the mail, with my name and my husband Mark's written in perfect calligraphy. An impromptu family luncheon, it said. Sunday at 1. The Oak Room. The Oak Room was at the country club, the place my in-laws, the Maxwells, considered their second home. It was a place of quiet judgment, where wealth was whispered and pedigrees were everything. My pedigree, according to them, was dirt. As I lifted my glass of water, trying to ignore the condescending smile on my mother-in-law's face, my phone buzzed discreetly in my lap. I glanced down, expecting a message from a friend. Instead, I saw a text from an unknown number. Just a few words that made the ice in my glass seem to melt and reform in my stomach. Stay calm. Don't look up. They're filming you. My blood ran cold. My stomach dropped. I kept my eyes down, my hand steady as I placed the glass back on the white linen tablecloth. Suddenly, the entire scene snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The country club was my husband's family's kingdom. The Maxwells weren't just members. They were royalty. My father-in-law, Richard, sat on the board. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, chaired every charity gala and committee. The staff fawned over them, bowing and scraping as if they were true monarchs. I was the commoner who had somehow married the prince, and they never let me forget it. From the moment Mark and I married 2 years ago, I was a project to them, a problem to be managed. They made it clear in 1,000 small ways that I wasn't their kind. It was in the way Eleanor would look at my dress, a perfectly nice one from a department store, and say, "Oh, that's practical, dear." It was in the way Richard would ask about my job as a graphic designer for a nonprofit, his voice full of false interest, before turning to Mark to discuss stock portfolios and acquisitions. He called my work my little hobby. My family was from a small town in the Midwest. My father was a mechanic, my mother a school teacher. We didn't have a family crest or a summer home in the Hamptons. We had love and we had integrity. To the Maxwells, that meant we had nothing. I thought this lunch was just another round of their usual games. Another Sunday spent smiling through backhanded comments about my background, my clothes, my opinions. But as I sat there, the stranger's text burning in my mind, I realized something was different. The air was thick with a tension that went beyond their usual disapproval. Their smirks were sharper. Their eyes held a gleam of anticipation. It wasn't just a lunch. It was an event. They were waiting for something. Mark sat beside me, silent. He hated these lunches as much as I did, but he was a son before he was a husband. He'd been raised to never rock the boat, to never defy his parents. He would squeeze my hand under the table, his way of apologizing without ever having to say a word. But today his hand was resting on his own lap. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was in on it. Whatever it was. That realization was the first crack in my heart. The waiter had just cleared our appetizer plates when Eleanor leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table. Her diamonds glittered under the low light of the chandelier. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Mark, darling," she said, completely ignoring me. "Your father and I were just saying, it's a shame, really. Some things just aren't meant to be." She paused, taking a slow sip of her Chardonnay, her eyes fixed on me over the rim of her glass. "We'll see how long this little marriage lasts." A ripple of quiet, cruel laughter went around the table. Richard chuckled into his napkin. Mark's sister Chloe, who was sitting directly across from me, let out a high-pitched giggle. I saw her whisper something to her phone, which she was holding just below the edge of the table. She deliberately angled it toward me, the little red light of the camera barely visible, and then it clicked. The text message wasn't a prank. They were recording me. This whole lunch was a stage, and I was the star of a show I didn't know I was in. They were poking me, prodding me, waiting for me to break. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to scream, to make a scene, to prove once and for all that I was the unstable, low-class girl who didn't belong in their perfect world. They wanted a video they could show to their friends, to Mark, to a divorce lawyer. Proof that I was the problem. My hands started to tremble in my lap. My breath felt trapped in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to stand up and throw my water in her face. To yell at Mark for his cowardice. to expose them for the vile bullies they were. But then, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, shielding the screen with my hand. Another text from the same number. They want you to explode. Don't give them the show. Who was this? Who was watching out for me in this viper's nest? I had no idea, but their words were a lifeline. They pulled me back from the edge. They wanted a show. I wouldn't give them one. I took a slow, deep breath. I imagined putting all my anger, my hurt, my humiliation into a little box and locking it tight. I lifted my head, looked directly at Eleanor, and forced a calm, pleasant smile onto my face. That's an interesting thought, Eleanor, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But I'm more interested in dessert. Could we see the menus? The silence that followed was more satisfying than any scream. Their smiles faltered. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion and irritation crossing her face. Chloe lowered her phone slightly, her smirk vanishing. Richard cleared his throat, looking flustered. I hadn't played my part. I had skipped to the end of the script, and they didn't know how to react. Mark finally looked at me, a strange mix of shock and something that might have been shame in his eyes. They had built a cage of cruelty and expected me to rattle the bars. Instead, I had started to admire the wallpaper. Their trap was failing, and their frustration was a small, secret victory that I held close. My calm defiance only made them more determined. They had planned a public execution, and they weren't going to be denied. After a tense few moments where they ordered dessert with clipped, angry words, Richard put down his fork. He tapped his glass with a knife, the sharp clink silencing the low murmur of the room. He was a man who commanded attention, and he was about to make his final move. He stood up, looking not at me, but at the room, as if making a corporate announcement. As many of you know, he began, his voice booming with authority. The Maxwell family values legacy, tradition, a certain standard. His eyes finally landed on me, cold and hard as steel. We have been patient. We have been accommodating. But it has become clear that some mistakes cannot be fixed. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The real reason for the cameras. Therefore, he continued, his voice dripping with false regret, we have decided as a family that Hannah does not belong with us, and we are actively helping our son Mark find someone better. Gasps echoed from the tables around us. I could hear muffled chuckles, and everywhere I looked, phones were up. Not just Chloe's anymore. Friends of the family, people I had shared holidays with, were all pointing their cameras at my face. They were all in on it. This was a coordinated attack, a public stoning. I looked at Mark, my husband. He was staring down at his plate, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. In his silence, he signed my death warrant. The love I had for him, the hope I had clung to for 2 long years, withered and died in that moment. There was nothing left but a hollow space in my chest. They wanted a meltdown. They wanted tears, hysteria, a scene that would confirm every terrible thing they thought about me. They wanted to break me for their own entertainment. I felt my composure starting to crack. The tears were burning behind my eyes. And then, one last buzz from my phone. Under the table, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read the screen. I looked at the final text. You have proof. Use it when the time's right. Proof. The stranger was right. I did have proof. For the last 6 months, I had known something like this was coming. The hostility had been growing, the whispers louder. I wasn't just a victim. I had been preparing. It started when I accidentally stumbled upon an email Mark had left open on our home computer. It was from his father, detailing a plan to systematically push me out of the family business, Maxwell and Sons, where I had been given a token position in the marketing department. They were building a case to fire me, to cut me off from any financial stake I might have. That night, my fear turned into cold, quiet rage. I started digging. I was just the girl with the little hobby, but my hobby had made me an expert in digital trails. I quietly hired a forensic accountant, a friend from college I trusted implicitly. I started making copies of everything. Screenshots of incriminating emails, voice recordings of Chloe bragging to a friend about how they were going to get rid of the charity case. And then I found the big one. The one that could bring their whole empire crashing down. Richard Maxwell wasn't just a brilliant businessman. He was a crook. For years, he had been using a series of shell corporations to evade taxes and hide assets. He was committing massive fraud. And I had the financial statements, the bank transfers, and the sworn affidavit from a disgruntled former CFO to prove it. I had been sitting on it, hoping I would never have to use it, hoping Mark would finally stand up and be the man I thought I married. But he wasn't that man, and this was the right time. With shaking hands, I opened my email on my phone. There it was, a draft addressed to the lead investigative journalist at the city's biggest newspaper. Another addressed to the SEC. All I had to do was press send. But I had a better idea. I didn't argue with Richard. I didn't cry or scream. The time for that was over. The hurt was still there, a giant gaping wound in my soul, but on top of it was a layer of ice. I took one last look at their smug, expectant faces. They were all leaning forward, cameras ready, hungry for my pain. Slowly, I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. I excused myself, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "If you'll excuse me," I said. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I slid it onto the center of the table, right next to the untouched plate of tiramisu. "For you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Richard looked at the envelope with contempt. "What is this? Your list of demands?" "No," I said. "It's my resignation." Inside that envelope were several documents I had prepared weeks ago. The first was my official notarized resignation from my position at Maxwell & Sons. The second was a legal document, drawn up by my lawyer, transferring my small number of non-voting shares in the company back to them, effective immediately. I wanted nothing from them. The third and most important was a sealed letter. On the front, I had written, "To be opened in the presence of your lawyers." Inside that letter was a simple message. I have copies of every financial document related to the offshore asset management project from 2018 to the present. The originals have been sent to a trusted third party. The SEC and the IRS will be receiving their copies within 24 hours, unless you cease all contact with me immediately. Your call. Their laughter died instantly. Chloe's phone clattered onto her plate. Eleanor's face went white. Richard stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. And my husband, Mark, finally looked up at me, his face a mask of pure terror. He knew. He knew what his father had been doing, and he knew that I knew. My phone buzzed one last time. I glanced at the screen. Well played. Walk away now. I stood up, smoothed down my dress, and turned my back on them. I walked out of the oak room, leaving them pale and speechless in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't run. I walked with a dignity they had tried so hard to steal from me. The entire room was silent, watching me go. I could feel their eyes on my back, but for the first time I didn't feel their judgment. I felt free. I didn't go home to the house I shared with Mark. I went to a small apartment I had secretly rented a month before. I had been planning my escape. Hours later, the news broke. It wasn't a dramatic headline at first. Just a small alert from a financial news network. Maxwell & Sons under federal investigation for suspected fraud. Someone hadn't waited 24 hours. My mysterious stranger, maybe. Or maybe the former CFO had decided today was the day. It didn't matter. The bomb had gone off. Their perfect world was on fire, and I was miles away watching the smoke rise. That night, I sat in my quiet, empty apartment. It was small, with secondhand furniture and boxes still waiting to be unpacked. But it was mine. It was safe. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe. My husband never called. I knew he wouldn't. He had made his choice, standing by his family as their criminal empire crumbled. I filed for divorce the next morning. I thought about the stranger who had guided me through the storm. I still had no idea who it was. A disgruntled employee? A family rival? A member of the country club staff who was tired of seeing people get bullied? Just as I was about to turn off my phone for the night, one last text came through from the unknown number. I was Richard's executive assistant for 10 years. He fired me when my son got sick and I needed to take time off. He ruined my life. I couldn't let him ruin yours. Not all family is blood, Hannah. Some of us just hate seeing bullies win. Tears finally came, but they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude. I wasn't alone. I had a guardian angel, a fellow survivor. I smiled, typing back a simple reply. Thank you. I blocked the number to protect her, and then I blocked every member of the Maxwell family. My old life was over. My new one was just beginning. So now I want to ask you, would you have stayed and fought, or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes silent strength is the loudest revenge of all.